In Australia, there is a criminal case, after which a judge left only one phrase in the verdict: never to be released. What led to that decision shocked even experienced detectives, and became part of the country's criminal history. This is not a story about random evil. This is a story about a woman everyone knew, and no one stopped in time. October 24th, 1955. In Tenterfield, Australia, a baby girl was born, destined to become one of the most terrifying figures in the country's history. Her name was Katherine Mary Knight. She was born second, 30 minutes after her twin sister, Joy. That delay meant nothing at the time. Its significance would come much later. Katherine grew up in a family where stability did not exist. Her mother, Barbara, already had children from previous relationships, 4 sons. With her new partner, Ken Knight, she gave birth to another boy, and later, the youngest, Shane. The children lived in fragments, sometimes together, sometimes apart, in different towns, different houses, often without the feeling that they truly belonged to anyone. After Barbara's marriage to Jack, Ruffin collapsed, the family essentially fell apart. Some of the children stayed with their father, others were sent to relatives in Sydney. Only Jack's death in 1959 briefly reunited some of them under one roof. But even then, the house felt more like a temporary shelter than a safe home. Ken Knight worked where most people could not last long, at slaughterhouses. His job forced the family to move again and again, following short-term contracts. The smell of blood, the sound of metal, carcasses split apart. All of it became part of Katherine's world long before she ever picked up a knife herself. When the family finally settled in Aberdeen in 1969, the slaughterhouse was once again nearby. For some, it would have been a shock. For Katherine, it was simply another chapter of a familiar life. As a child, she did not appear aggressive. Quite the opposite. She was quiet, detached, as if constantly lost in her own thoughts. She showed a strange attraction to animals, but there was something tense about it, something far too serious for a child. At 13, Katherine first came to the attention of police. A minor incident quickly forgotten. No one saw it as a warning. At 16, she went exactly where her path had been leading all along, to the Aberdeen slaughterhouse. Her father worked there, her brother did, so did her sister. Surrounded by men, she learned quickly how to survive. Sharp words, crude jokes, and absolutely no fear. Before long, she was no longer seen as the girl at work. People simply did not want to deal with her. Katherine loved control, especially when a knife was in her hands. If someone crossed a line, she immediately offered to settle it, right then and there. Those offers were never accepted. She collected boning knives, perfectly sharpened, carefully maintained. At home, they hung above her bed, not as tools, but as symbols. At the time, it seemed like strange eccentricity, but it was during this period, surrounded by steel, blood, and daily exposure to death, that the Katherine Knight the world had yet to know began to take shape. In 1973, she met David Kellett, a young truck driver. Katherine was certain. He had to be hers. After turning 18, she moved in with him. A year later, they were married. From the very beginning, the marriage was filled with tension. According to acquaintances on their wedding night, Katherine attacked David when he refused to continue intimacy. Later, when David began working at the slaughterhouse, she would show up and silently watch the killing. He was terrified. She watched, calm, focused, unblinking. The birth of their daughter, Melissa Ann, in May 1976, changed nothing. Katherine's aggression only intensified. Eventually, David left for another woman, trying to escape a life that had become unbearable. For Katherine, this was not a breakup. It was betrayal, and her anger needed an outlet. One day, she went to the railway tracks. In her arms was 2-month-old Melissa. Katherine placed the baby directly on the rails, where a train could appear at any moment. Only chance saved the infant. A homeless man, known in the area as Old Ted, who scavenged for food near the tracks, found Melissa and rescued her, by all accounts, just minutes before a train passed through. At the time, it was seen as a shocking episode. No one understood yet that this was not an exception, but a warning. But Katherine's day did not end there. Later, she borrowed an axe from her neighbors and began swinging it above her head, threatening people on the street, including an elderly man who happened to be nearby. Police intervened quickly, and Katherine was taken to St. Elmo's Hospital in Tamworth. Doctors diagnosed postpartum depression and released her. They failed to understand the true seriousness of the situation. Just days later, Katherine lost control again. Armed with a large knife, she slashed a woman across the face, demanding to be taken to David Kellett. Covered in blood, the woman managed to survive, escaping to a gas station and screaming for help. When police arrived, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Katherine was gripping a small boy by his clothing, waving the knife and shouting threats. Officers were forced to physically tear the child from her grasp, blocking her blows with whatever objects they could find, until the knife was finally knocked from her hand. On a doctor's recommendation, Katherine was placed under supervision in a psychiatric hospital. Little Melissa was handed over to her grandparents, Barbara and Ken Knight. Police contacted David Kellett, who was working in Queensland at the time. Together with his mother, Jean, he traveled hundreds of kilometers to see Katherine, and the moment she saw him, her behavior changed instantly. She acted as if nothing serious had happened, as though it had all been nothing more than a brief loss of control. On August 9, 1976, Katherine was released into her mother-in-law's care on the condition that John would ensure she took her medication regularly. On the way home, they picked up Melissa. Just weeks later, Katherine and David were living together again, in a small rented house in Queensland. David found work as a truck driver. Katherine returned to work as a boner at the local slaughterhouse. But their reunion quickly became even more dangerous. The smallest trigger could send her into a rage. She attacked David with her fists, with pots, with knives, with whatever was within reach. Despite the constant chaos, on March 6, 1980, their second daughter was born, Natasha Marie. Then, in 1984, something happened that David had dreamed of for years. One day, he came home to an empty house. Katherine had taken the children, packed her things, and disappeared. She went to her parents' farm near Aberdeen, returned to work at the slaughterhouse, and reclaimed her maiden name, Knight. Life with her parents didn't last long. Soon, she rented a house in a nearby town and moved there with the children. A year later, the physical strain of slaughterhouse work finally destroyed her health. Her back gave out, and Katherine was forced to leave the one thing she truly loved. The government provided her with public housing in Aberdeen. She was satisfied. The school was nearby. The children were supervised. She had a pension and a stable income. But something was missing. A man. After several failed attempts to rebuild her personal life, in 1986, Katherine met David Saunders at a local pub. He was a 38-year-old miner from a neighboring town, strong, rugged, with a simple rural charisma that drew people in. His only weakness was alcohol. Despite Katherine's past, her violent outbursts, her habit of attacking people with knives or cookware, she knew how to appear appealing, lively, fun, sexual, and her insatiable appetite quickly pulled Saunders into her world. The first months together seemed almost perfect. David kept his apartment in his hometown, but moved in with Katherine and her daughters. Over time, however, Katherine's jealousy took over. She tried to control his every move, slowly crushing his inner world. She constantly accused him of affairs that never existed. Arguments turned into screams, then into physical attacks. Katherine, taller and stronger than David, brutally assaulted him with her hands, her feet, and any object nearby. In May 1987, she decided to show him exactly what would happen if David ever looked at another woman. She took a small puppy, the one David loved deeply, and slit its throat with a knife, from ear to ear. When David, horrified, rushed toward her, she struck him with a frying pan so hard that he lost consciousness. Despite the horror, despite Katherine's disturbing behavior, David's love for her remained unchanged. The following year, in June, Katherine gave birth to her third child, a daughter named Sarah. With the arrival of the baby, a fragile calm briefly settled over the household. It was during this time that David decided to take a serious step. He put down a deposit on a small house in Aberdeen, Katherine's first home of her own, and when, in 1989, she was officially granted disability compensation, she paid off the house in full. For the first time, Katherine had a space she could truly call her own. She filled it with objects that reflected her dark and disturbing fascinations. The walls were decorated with cow and buffalo hides, animal horns, old fur cloaks, cow and sheep skulls, In places of honor stood taxidermy peacocks and a stuffed deer. From beams and shelves hung wooden pitchforks, old animal traps, leather jackets, rakes, riding boots, whips, and saddles. Every free corner was piled high with newspapers, clothes, and books. Her video collection was made up almost entirely of horror films and recordings about death. The house became more than just a home. It became a museum of Katherine's inner world, a physical manifestation of what lived inside her mind. But even a house, children, and a sense of stability could not change Katherine's nature for long. Another violent outburst shattered the fragile peace. During one attack, she struck David in the head with an iron and tried to stab him with scissors. When David returned to Scone after a weekend away, under the pretense of reconciliation, Katherine invited him inside to witness the chaos she had prepared. All of his clothes had been ripped to shreds and thrown away like garbage. This was not a prank. It was a display of power. This time, David understood. The line had been crossed. He took extended leave from the mine, disappeared from every pub, and went into hiding as best he could. His friends knew where he was. No one told Katherine. In Scone, people had already begun to refer to her as Miss Knight, as if she were a natural disaster. Katherine searched for him for weeks, crying, raging, but each time she hit a wall. Eventually, she gave up. Months later, David decided to return to McQueen Street just to see his daughter. That was when he learned what Katherine had done in his absence. She had gone to the local police, claiming she feared his return and possible violence. As a result, a formal restraining order was issued against him, barring him from the house, from Katherine, and from the children. Katherine did not remain alone for long. Her new partner was John Chillingworth, a 43-year-old slaughterhouse worker. Within months, she became pregnant, and in 1991, she gave birth to a son, Eric. Their relationship was unstable, chaotic, and lasted only 3 years. Locals shook their heads, unable to understand how he had survived so long beside her. After that, Katherine quickly found another man, John Price from Aberdeen. She left Chillingworth before he could completely destroy himself. Price, unlike the others, was not so fortunate. He stepped into the life of the woman locals whispered about as the Witch of Aberdeen. He was in his early 30s. Those who knew him described him as honest, kind, and always willing to help, even at the cost of his own comfort. He was divorced, lived with his 2 older children, owned a small brick house, and worked in the mines, earning a steady income. In 1993, Price met Katherine at a local pub. He was 38, so was she. Soon they were seen together everywhere, and John Price entered the relationship fully aware of Katherine's past and of what she had done to the men before him. He had heard the stories, he heard them, and chose not to believe, or perhaps he was convinced things would be different with him. At first, it seemed they were. Katherine appeared to be a different person, attentive, caring, passionate. She cooked for him, mended his clothes, picked him up from the pubs when he stayed too late. In bed, she was so enticing that Price would smile to his friends, saying that anyone would have risked it if they were in his place. Evenings passed quietly, without shouting, without drama. It seemed life had finally returned to a brighter path. But it was an illusion. Very soon, Katherine began to suspect him of infidelity. She staged scenes, packed her things, left, and always returned. They were back in the cycle she knew so well: rage, reconciliation, passion, jealousy, threats, promises. A sense of unease slowly gathered over the house. Something inevitable hung in the air. Price had not yet realized how close he was to the line, beyond which there is no return. By the end of 1995, Katherine had moved completely into his tidy family home. After her cluttered house, hung with hides, skulls, and strange trophies, this home seemed almost perfect. But calm was not something she could maintain. Alcohol returned, the fights returned. They were seen everywhere, in the streets, shouting at each other, in the pubs where their happy nights had once begun. Moments ago, laughter, loud jokes, kisses across the table, and the next minute, a flood of insults so intense that even the regular patrons preferred to watch in silence. In 1998, Katherine showed the mine management a video secretly filmed at home. The footage allegedly showed items Price had taken from work. She did not hide her intentions. This was revenge for another argument and for his refusal to marry her. After a fight in which he struck her, Katherine initially intended to use the video as leverage, but she went further. She handed the recording to his employer. Although the items on tape had long been discarded and were found in the trash, it was enough. Price was fired. That same day, he threw her out of the house and sent her back to McQueen Street, to that same dreadful house. The town reacted instantly. Everyone knew who he was dealing with. Few were surprised. Months later, when Price let her back into his life, even without moving in, he lost more than a job. He lost friends. People stopped talking to him. No one wanted to be near Katherine. They could not live together. And even worse, they could not live apart. Eventually, Katherine got the keys to Price's house again. It brought no peace. The fights only escalated. During one, on February 29, 2000, she stabbed John in the chest. He went to court and obtained a restraining order, prohibiting her from approaching him or his home. But the paper did not stop her. That very night, Price tried to sleep. Returning from the neighbors, he heard a car outside. It was Katherine. She entered the house as if nothing had happened, sat down, turned on the television, took a shower, and lay down beside him. Then, they made love. Fear, conflict, reconciliation. A vicious cycle they repeated for years. This time, the cycle was broken by death. On the morning of March 1st, a neighbor noticed Price's work pickup still parked outside the house. It was unusual. He normally left much earlier. Together with another acquaintance, they tried to reach him through the bedroom window. Then, they approached the door and saw blood. They immediately called the police. Around 8 o'clock, officers broke the back door and entered. What they saw in the living room would haunt them for the rest of their lives. In the doorway hung John Price's skin on a metal hook, peeled off in a single piece from head to groin. Nearby, on the floor, lay his decapitated body. During the subsequent search, police found Katherine Knight in the farthest bedroom of the house. She was asleep on the double bed and snoring loudly. The woman was heavily sedated, unaware of what had occurred. She was removed from the house and taken to the hospital. Thus ended one of the most brutal nights in Australian history, a night that Aberdeen will never forget. Below is the report from the forensic officer who first entered the house after John Price's body was discovered. In cases of this nature, the investigator is required to personally examine the crime scene and document it in its original condition, before any interference. At approximately 10 a.m. on March 1st, 2000, I arrived at the house at 84 Andrew Street, Aberdeen, along with Detective Neil Raymond, in connection with a suspected homicide. The house was single-story, with 3 bedrooms. In the yard stood 3 vehicles, a Toyota SUV, a Ford sedan, and a Toyota Land Cruiser pickup. Behind the house were 2 metal sheds and a brick barbecue. Along the front facade stretched a veranda, and a smaller one was at the rear. On the lawn, near one of the vehicles, I noticed a piece of prepared meat. It was examined and seized for further analysis. After photographing the grounds, we entered the house through the back door and stepped into the kitchen. Immediately, it was clear that a fragment of human skin hung from the top of the doorway, leading into the living room. It extended to the floor and appeared to be an almost completely removed human layer. Through the doorway into the living room, the decapitated and eviscerated body was visible. In the hallway and entryway, the floor was soaked in blood, and broad bloodstains remained on the walls. The trail led to the master bedroom, where fresh blood marks were also recorded, though in smaller quantities. The kitchen and dining area formed a single space. In the center stood a table with 3 chairs, on the backs of which clothing was draped. On the table lay a tool bag, personal belongings, a folder, an electronic gorilla toy, and several boxes of medication. One of the shirts thrown over a chair bore a visible blood stain. Nearby was a stove with a baking tray and an aluminum pot. Between the kitchen and living room, the removed human skin still hung. Upon detailed examination, the top portion showed black curly hair, as well as a nose, part of a mouth, and an ear. About midway, there was a clump of short, dark hair. No other clear anatomical features were visible. The edges of the skin were even, indicating the use of a very sharp instrument. It was secured with a metal meat hook that passed through the top and was held by the door frame. The thickness of the skin layer ranged from 1 to 4 centimeters. I noticed a trail of blood leading from the living room into the kitchen. straight to the stove. On the stove stood an aluminum pot. The burner was turned off, but when I lifted the lid, it was still warm. Inside was liquid, and floating on the surface, a severed human head beside several boiled vegetables. Nearby, on the stove, there was a baking tray with liquid and the remains of roasted vegetables. On the table next to the stove were 2 prepared meals, cooked pieces of meat, vegetables, and gravy. Under the plates were paper towels with names written on them: Becky and Jonathan. The meat matched in appearance a piece that had been found earlier in the backyard. The kitchen was smeared with blood on dishes, knives, the kettle, the refrigerator, and the work surfaces. On the floor, there was a bloody footprint of a bare foot. In the living room lay the body of John Price. His head had been removed. His body was almost completely skinned. Forensic experts documented numerous stab wounds, 37 in total. It was determined that Price was already dead before the skin was removed. Near the body were several knives and a sharpening steel. Bloody handprints were found on the furniture and the walls. In the same room, investigators discovered a note with a broken photograph lying on top of it. The note read, "Time has taken revenge on you, Jonathan, for what you did to my daughter. This is for Ross and for little John. Now, play with little John's part, John Price." These accusations were never substantiated. Investigators concluded that Katherine Knight killed Price, skinned him, decapitated him, and prepared parts of his body, including the meat, as food. The piece of meat found in the yard matched the portions that had been prepared for serving. At the time, Price's children were not present. The entire sequence of events took approximately 40 minutes. After the killing, Katherine drove to an ATM and withdrew $1,000 from his bank card. On March 6, 2000, she was formally charged. In October 2001, she pleaded guilty. Psychiatrists confirmed that she was legally sane. On November 8th, the court sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The appeal was denied. Today, 70-year-old Katherine Knight remains incarcerated in a women's correctional facility in New South Wales, where she works as a cleaner. Even behind bars, Katherine remains the true boss. She resolves conflicts, influences the lives of other inmates, and makes everyone pay attention to her. She is respected and somewhat feared because even the guards know it's better not to argue with her. Friends, thank you for watching. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below.